G'day, ZiggyD here with another look at the Path of Exile patch 1.3 passive skill tree. In this video I'm going to be going over one of my favorite parts of these sets of changes in this patch, and that is how the skill tree is becoming a ton more interesting than what it has been in the past. So I've seen the skill tree change quite a bit since closed beta in the past 2 years or so that I've been playing. And one thing that has been happening quite a bit lately, and this kind of began with some of the changes to the Witch and Shadow and things like that. I started noticing a trend of them making the skill tree just a whole lot more interesting, which is good. The skill tree needs to be exciting, it needs to be fun. There needs to be these nodes that guide you through the tree, that make you want to strive for something. Not just as a beginner, but as a beginner, you're looking in the tree and you don't know how to start. How do I navigate this thing? This thing's crazy. But then when you see a cool node that does something like, oh, my crit strikes poison the enemy. That sounds really cool. I'm going to get that. That sort of thing helps guide you through the tree. But then when you move into an advanced player, this sort of converts over from sort of an interest thing trying to guide you through the tree into a thing that you're trying to break the game with. The thing that you try to min-max and make interesting builds out of. So we have seen a few of these interest-based changes, making things a lot more thematic, fun, and interesting, with things like Adder's Touch, with things like Tempest Blast, added lightning damage here. We recently had like lightning penetration added, we've had penetration, we've had some interesting other elements added to the top of the skill tree here. Another one that I like is piercing shots, adding projectile pierce on the tree. A lot of things that were previously relegated only to support gems or specific uniques started making their way into the passive skill tree very slowly at first. But now they've been creeping in more and more, and I think this tree is really, at 1.3, hitting this breaking point of awesomeness, where things are starting to get really freaking awesome. So today we just had version 2 of the patch 1.3 tree release, so there was some more overhauls to the Marauder and Duelist, and these areas became a lot nicer. But alongside of this came some very interesting changes, and now that we have kind of a bit more of a full list, I'm going to go through some of the notable nodes that have changed or become more interesting for you guys, so that you guys can just be aware what cool shit is in the tree. Excuse my language. And you guys can have a bit of an idea of maybe some of the cool builds that you might want to make in 1.3. So the first one I want to highlight for you guys is actually two. The first two I want to highlight for you guys is Bloodletting and Razor's Edge. Now, Bloodletting has just been added down here. This is a brand new one just here. We have Bloodletting, increased physical damage over time, so that's bleeding essentially, and increased attack damage against bleeding enemies. So this is an example here of a notable that's gotten very interesting. In fact, I can't remember if Bloodletting existed. It sounds familiar. It might have existed in some boring form in the past. It was probably just like base damage, because that's a lot of these nodes in the past, let's face it, were just things like 24% increased physical damage. Yay! But now they do cool stuff like this. And we even have things like melee attacks have 6% chance to cause bleeding. So now, instead of just using the Puncher skill gem, you can actually get some bleed chance from the tree, and then scale the bleeding damage from the tree as well. Now combining that with Razor's Edge just over here, melee attacks have 5% chance to cause bleeding. Oh yes, you can get 11% chance to cause a bleed from the tree now. Very, very cool stuff. So you can instantly see how like a heavy hitting fizz build, stacking that bleed chance just there, can make a non-puncture using bleed build, or you can use puncture and just use this to scale your bleeding damage. Pretty cool stuff. And it's quite obvious, that some builds can possibly be made out of that. Maybe taking advantage of some of the new changes in the duelist section as well. The next one I want to highlight for you guys is Unyielding, and I'll use this handy search feature just here. And if I pop out over here, Unyielding is an armor node. Now, there's been these armor nodes kind of floating around the Templar Marauder area in the past, and they were basically just something like 14% armor, 14% armor, 30% armor, or something like that, just basic armor scaling. But now we have Unyielding. You take 20% reduced extra damage from critical strikes. Now these reduced crit damage used to be over in Marauder as single nodes by themselves. So what they've done is they've taken that was a pretty interesting node to be fair, but they've taken the boring armor nodes and combined that with the reduced damage from critical strikes. So this is a good one to know, because Whereas armor by itself may not be exciting enough to sort of get you into it, even though it's something that if you're playing an armor-based build, you should get some armor scaling. It's probably a good idea, but could get something more exciting. This actually makes this a lot more significant now, so a really nice change just there. The next one I want to show you guys is Slaughter, and that is over the left-hand side just here. We have increased physical damage with axes, accuracy rating with axes, you know, that's... In the past, that would have been enough, but now we have 10% chance to gain Onslaught for 3 seconds on kill. Onslaught is, I think it's a 20% attack, move speed, and cast speed buff. Essentially, it lasts 3 seconds. So previously, that was only brought in on a few uniques, like Kongol's Undying Rage. But now you can actually get that from the passive skill tree. And 10%, you know, you're killing things pretty frequently. That's going to go off quite often. It's going to be noticeable. Now, these notables now are having an actual impact on your build, a noticeable impact on your build, and a cool impact on your build. Love it, love it. So the next one here is Skull Cracking I want to show you guys. This one's had quite a bit of heated discussion about it actually, and it is a mace node just here. It's got the stun threshold reduction like it had in the past, and that was cool. Maces kind of had a theming thing where they were decent damage, but with this kind of like stun effect going on as well. Now it has an additional thing just here. Your stuns have Culling Strike. Now that's very cool. There are some problems associated with this that people are bringing up, because if you're culling and you're running with a magic finder and you're getting the kills, then your ally's magic find isn't applying. So there are some potential issues with this in the tree, and a few people, including myself, are arguing that maybe Culling Strike should be made on another node back here, and this one shouldn't have it. So make it a bit more of an option instead. But we're going to see a lot of builds take that, and then maybe it causes some problems. But I think a lot of parties don't run with a magic finder, and for those that don't, it's really going to be a non-issue. And it's actually going to be a great node for cast on melee kills builds as well, because you can guarantee you get that kill, and then you can guarantee the proc from cast on melee kill. So still, nonetheless, very cool node. Nice thematic sort of thing there as well. Skull Cracking, you know, you get that fatal blow in the head, and it's going to finish someone off. Next one is Soul of Steel. I think I really like this one. I'm going to rave about this one, I think. Which one? Is this the one I'm thinking of? Yes, this is the one I'm thinking of. So, again, boring armor nodes, blah, but Soul of Steel has 4% additional physical damage reduction added to it. Now that is a flat 4% added on to your total physical damage mitigation, and it's always like that. This doesn't scale with the size of the hit like armor normally does. So what this means is, this is basically an extra endurance charge for your character that is always active. So that's a big and interesting new form of mitigation. Now it's only one now, it's only this one 4%, but it could be showing something that the game's heading towards in the future. And these sorts of changes are the sorts of things that will maybe reduce our reliance on things like Cloak of Defiance and Lightning Coil and stuff like that, and make armor a viable choice again, especially if they're tying it in with armor. Great move there with that particular node. Next one I want to show you guys is Juggernaut, and I'll post this one just in here. Juggernaut is over the left side just here, and it's another armor cluster. Armor cluster is getting a lot more interesting. And this is actually an armor life cluster, so combining those two has been a bit of a trend that's been happening lately. But this one's got increased life recovery from flasks. Now that may not seem super interesting, but I did want to point this one out because I think life recovery from flasks is something that's been underestimated. Flasks were buffed in 1.2. There was some life recovery from flasks added over here, especially Profane Chemistry, and there's also some here with Herbalism. You can actually get a huge amount of flask scaling now and have extremely potent flasks that can give you life regeneration many times beyond what you can possibly get by stacking life regen. And flasks are a really powerful thing in Path of Exile, and I think they get underestimated, so do pay attention to that Juggernaut node, and it may well be worth routing through here to get into the Marauder section, or just poking in there and grabbing Juggernaut for the 20% extra flask effectiveness, because that's kind of a big deal. Next up is Executioner. Sounds like a pretty cool node. Is a pretty cool node. Executioner's down here on the south side, near Duelist. 20% increased damage who are on low life. That's cool, I like that. So low life is 35%, it's actually 35.5, but it's 35% life or lower. Enemies now are taking extra damage. This is a mechanic I've seen in other games, kind of like a finishing blow sort of thing, or sometimes it's flipped and enemies with full life take extra damage. But I like to see this added, and it is very cool thematically too. You know, it's a two-handed sword node. The Executioner, you know, an enemy that's on death's row, getting that finishing blow. It's kind of, you know, it's not exactly a culling strike sort of thing, but still a nice, interesting damage boost there. So a pretty cool extra one. It's not exactly a build enabling sort of thing. It's not something you're going to go for to, you know, to make your build work or to really change the way your build functions, but it's a nice, cool power sort of addition for those two-handed sword builds. Next up, we have Testudo, a shield node just next to it here, which has, you know, block and block recovery, but now it's got 8 mana gained on block. So essentially, this idea that you're blocking a lot, and as you're doing it, you're powering up, and then you get to take out the enemy. Thematically very cool, but this one's actually quite a bit of a build enabler, because 8 mana gained when you block, if you're playing a higher block stacking build, and although block was nerfed, you can still stack a lot of block. That's potentially the sort of thing that could solve your mana problems without you having to invest in other forms of mana, especially because it's right next to Revelry, so you can combine something with block mana recovery and Revelry, which are both kind of interesting different styles of mana, apart from just regular mana scaling and mana regeneration, and you find yourself maybe not having to run Clarity, or maybe not having to sink another, you know, 10 points into mana to make your build function. So pretty cool stuff there. Next up, we have Solidity, not Solidarity, Solidity over this side, which is another shield node, and I wanted to give this a mention because I didn't mention this in my video about block being nerfed, because although block percent has been nerfed, there's been quite a few buffs to shields in general, and this is a good example of one of those just here. This one has increased melee physical damage while holding a shield, so there's now actually a whole bunch of shield nodes like this. Actually, I think there might be some in the Templar area, perhaps. There's some floating around somewhere. Trust me, guys, you'll have to trust me on this one. I know there is, but there are some shield nodes floating around somewhere in the tree that give you extra damage while holding a shield. So not only now are you getting this for the pure defensive purposes, but it's making it much more attractive by adding in extra damage as well. So cool stuff there, and it's sort of signifying that although block has been nerfed, shields are still a pretty good option and offer some extra benefits now. And then the final one I want to show you guys is Celestial Punishment, up on the left here. I did show this off in the Templar video, but I wanted to bring attention to it again here because it's really rad. This node is all coolness. This node is all interest. This node has no, like, you know, damage, or, you know, this is not 12 lightning damage and then something cool. This isn't 14 armor and then something cool. This is just all cool stuff. We have chance to freeze shock and ignite, which is a build enabler, and then 30% increased damage against frozen shocked or ignited enemies, which is a big theming thing and a very big cool factor node just there. So that's a fantastic node. I love Celestial Punishment so much. This is actually not one I put on the list either, but I need to bring attention again because I love Light of Divinity. This one, for me it's cool. For everyone, for probably most sane people, not very cool, but spell damage, cast speed, and light radius. I love it. As the warrior of light that the Templar is, I love that he has a light radius node that is actually good. So I love that one just there. Now the final thing I wanted to mention about this theming of the tree and making it more cool is that the way that they're shaping the tree now is that this stuff is outside of the start areas, and that's a pretty important point. Now there is some pretty nice stuff in the start areas, like I said, you know, there's like the Elementalist, which has some here, there's Light of Divinity, especially in the newly overhauled areas. I'm noticing that. I'm not seeing as much of that in the other trees. I suppose Witch has things like Lord of the Dead, which are a pretty interesting and theming nodes. She has practical application. You know, there's a little bit of that sprinkled in the start areas, but the really cool stuff and the really potentially build defining stuff, you know, like the Bleed and, you know, Executioner and Skull Cracking, all of this stuff is around the outside of the tree. Now, this is great because what this does is it pulls you out of the start area, and the start areas generally have quite a lot of efficient nodes, and in the past the idea was that all of the efficient nodes were in the start areas, and then you would only travel to reach keystones basically, and all the other stuff was kind of meh. You would just pick it up if you wanted extra stat bolstering. But now all the really cool stuff is outside, you get drawn out, build shapes become a lot more interesting, you have a lot more interesting decisions to make. So you kind of need to pick your routing through your beginning area carefully, think about if you are going into another beginning area for pure power boosting, and then put your build together out of a combination of keystones and these extra notable effects. So when you're planning your builds in the future, you kind of need to start paying attention to these little notables, because In the past, they weren't very exciting, but they're starting to become a whole lot more exciting. So anyway, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this little kind of showcase of some of the cool changes in 1.3. If you have any thoughts to share on this set of changes in particular, then let me know in the comments below. That's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.